Okay, it looks like we're live. So, hello everyone, and welcome to my custom chess position or custom chess variant. This is called What's Your Decision? It's a custom chess position that I created back in early 2022. So, I'm excited to share with you this position and all the strategies that come along with it. So, the rules of this position are just like standard chess, only the setup is quite a lot different. So what we're going to notice right now is the first thing you're going to obviously see is that you have a trapped queen and a trapped bishop for each side. So white has a trapped queen and bishop, black has a trapped queen and bishop. So this position is diagonally symmetrical. So these pieces are kind of blocked in by the three pawns, by their own three pawns, and the pawns are locked in place by the opponent's pawns. So from here we see that there are some key squares. So the key squares are f6 and for black to attack and c3 for white to attack. So both sides will try to sacrifice pieces in order to free their pieces and to also control the center of the board, just like in standard chess. So and the other side will also they'll try to defend their weak pawns. So like white, for example, uh, might move this pawn, this e pawn all the way up to e5 to try and defend the f6 pawn, and black might do the same thing. Um, Black might do the same thing for their own pawn. Um, and once you've freed your queen and bishop, your opponent actually can go for pawn promotion though. So like right now you can't really play, for example, f4, f5, and then take on g6 because, well, after your opponent takes f takes g6, then the bishop is free, and then the queen will be able to come out after that as well. So in most cases, that's not a good idea. But if your opponent's queen, for example, if your opponent's queen and bishop are free already, then you can promote pawns. So pawn promotion becomes a theme, especially in the endgame. In terms of how to sacrifice, you can use your rooks, bishops, or knights to sacrifice. And actually, if you look at the pieces, so each side has 13 pawns, and each side also has all the same pieces as a standard chess game, except each side has an extra light squared bishop, so here and here. And so because light squared bishops, one of each is trapped, it's fairly common for double light squared bishop endgames. And so I've talked about sacrificing pieces to free your queen and bishop, but if you do sacrifice too much, it could be bad for you, as you could lose due to not having enough material. There's also when you sacrifice and free your own queen, your opponent can more freely promote their pawns. One other big thing in the position is these two kings. So white's king and black's king are like quite advanced, and they're also kind of stuck in front of their own pawns. So these kings could become entrapped or also become targets for the enemy pieces. That's another theme of this position. So as you can see over here, we have the engine evaluation of the position. So one thing to note over here is the computer understands the tactics quite well in this position, but it doesn't really understand some of the pieces freeing aspect of the game. So it can struggle, especially in the opening. So actually, when I played the computer on the maximum like level, I've been able to gain advantages in the opening, and a lot of times I've lost due to tactics, but I've also able to beat the computer fairly frequently as well. So it's definitely not perfect by any stretch. And actually, so this game kind of has two sort of like areas. So the first area of the freeing queens and things like that, it's actually quite possible to get lots of theory, and I've actually been able to create a lot of theory on this position. Um, so there's a lot of theory and very tactical lines. So the computer has helped a lot in the theory, but in terms of the actual ideas, it's been humans, but the lines themselves, the computers come up with some very interesting lines, and there's some very interesting theory on this position that is actually going to be the subject of the future videos of this series. This video is kind of just an introduction. So in some games, basically material can be the deciding factors. In others, you would sacrifice material to open up your pieces and attack your enemy king even after your queen and bishop are free. So there's a lot of different things that can happen, which is why I've called this position "What's Your Decision?" because you never really, you always have to make a decision based on many different factors. Um, So one thing to note over here is that actually symmetrical games are really rare and they don't really happen much due to the tactical nature of the position, the fact that the queens see each other on the diagonal. So for example, if I were just to input some like symmetrical moves on the board, so let's just say something like this happens, and black is copying white. After white takes on c3 here with the rook, black takes on f6, and white is winning after rook takes c4 because the queen on the diagonal sees the other queen, and black's queen is the one that's endangered as the rook is pinned to the queen. So if black tries to copy white, black can find themselves in quite a bit of trouble. And so as most of these videos are going to focus on the opening theory, well, one thing to note is that after one or both queens are free, normally like the theory kind of stops and it's really hard to think of and like find actual theory. But before that, there is quite a lot. White has more choice than black of what they want to do. They both have very dynamic and powerful lines. So in some lines, there's a question of sacrificing a pawn or for a piece, or like sacrificing a pawn like to free the opponents, to free your pieces, and also to help for you to be able to eventually sacrifice on c3 if you're white or f6 if you're black. You can also sacrifice an entire piece. And if your opponent's pieces are freed, your pawn structure is very important, and this can sometimes be the only thing keeping your king safe, as because your king is kind of in front of a bunch of pawns, it's hard for your king to go to safety in this game. So you have to be thinking of king safety all the time. And actually, if your king gets kind of trapped in all your pawns, like trapped by all your pawns, if this goes into an endgame, your king won't be able to get active. But I mean, that also means that there's some stalemate opportunities as well in the position. So it's really a very rich position, and so I'm going to be showing a few sample games as sort of like a introduction to this position and how it can be played, and yeah. So moving to the first sample game over here, I was playing as black. So my opponent started with knight, which does try to attack on my g4 square. Sorry, my b4 square. So that can also become a weakness for the opponent. So I played c5. My opponent is starting to control the center, and here I go with d5, which is a pawn sacrifice. The idea with the sacrifice is that after if my opponent accepts it, if my opponent takes, then I'm going to basically play c6. If my opponent takes again, so now I can take back with rook takes c6, and actually I'm winning here even though I'm down a pawn because my rook is seeing the f6 pawn, and I'm going to be able to sacrifice there. So actually, best in this position is to not even take the d5 pawn at all. But at least if you're going to take the d5 pawn, then after c6, you would probably have to play d6, and that would allow for bishop takes d6, and so you wouldn't actually be up a pawn, but that would be kind of the way to save the rook from. So black's rook wouldn't get to c6, but black is still better here, so you should not take this. But in this game, it shows the kind of the importance of different like sacrifices. So my opponent actually took c6. My opponent took again. So after rook takes c6, rook e1 was played, and I was just able to sacrifice on f6. So actually over here, if my opponent were to take my rook, I can actually checkmate them like this on h5. If my opponent played something like f4 instead, this is actually still my opponent can take on f6 because, for example, after this is checkmate. So bishop c6 is checkmate. So that's how that could go. But even if my opponent could take back, it's still a very good idea to sacrifice, as I'm freeing my queen and my bishop just for the rook. So this game, my opponent is basically already lost over here. But my opponent played on, and now that I've freed my pieces, I basically simplified the game. And after f6, so after I played f6 here, my bishop is now coming out and my queen is ready free. So I first take some time to like develop my pieces. So I bring my knight to d5. Bishop goes back to c1 to try and sacrifice on a3, so my opponent can, if I take back, then c3 can fall and my opponent can get their pieces out. But of course, I don't need to play into any of that. So I've just played knight takes f4. After my opponent takes, I bring my queen into the game. I've freed my queen, I can bring it to e5, and I'm threatening knight to g2 checkmate. There's nothing my opponent could do to stop it, so my opponent just throws in one more move, giving up the queen, but it doesn't matter because knight g2 is mate. So that's one game in this position. I'm going to show two more for this introduction video. So this next game deals with king safety. So again, here I'm playing as black. And by the way, these games are all correspondence chess games that I'm playing this position, but I might be showing live games in the future. Depends on what games show the different like theory that I've developed in the position. But it's kind of these games kind of don't have that much theory that was played in them, but they're quite interesting. So this game is showing king safety more than anything. So my opponent started at the opening and they started controlling the center right away. So I played c6 so I can bring out my bishop or my knight, and I played knight to e6. My opponent played e5. So actually over here, sometimes you might want to play e5 or for white or d4 for black, but other times you might want to put a knight in the square because then the knight can also like attack f5. And actually after, so my opponent ended up playing e5 over here. So actually the f5 square becomes a bit weaker, and you'll see that as that's actually what made the difference in this game. But yeah, if you don't have to, probably playing e5 or d4 for black is not the best idea, but lots of times it's needed as it helps to reinforce the f6 or c3 pawns. So my opponent played e5, and I just developed, and I brought my knight to b5 over here. So actually, one other interesting thing in this position is whether you bring your knight or your bishop to b5 as black or to a g4 as white. So if you bring your bishop to that square, your bishop is very active, and it can also like maybe sacrifice for one of the pieces over here because your light squared bishop. So in this position you have many pieces that can sacrifice on like f6 or c3, but your light squared bishop, at least the one that's not trapped, your second light squared bishop, it cannot really sacrifice, but it plays a very important role in disrupting the opponent's defense. So for example, if it was on b5, it could do that, but also it can attack their opponent's king, which is what we're going to see in this game. And it's also, its activity could make a difference in a game, or it could even like block your pieces. So the light squared bishop is incredibly important in the theory, and you'll see when I show you the theory in the future that where the light squared bishop goes is actually very instrumental in the theory. So over here I brought a knight to b5, and now so I bring my e knight to d4. So now I'm threatening to go to f5. So f5 is weak, g2 is weak. There's a lot of weaknesses that my opponent has to take care of. But my opponent took, but I have a second knight that comes in here. And now my opponent took on b4. Because I think my opponent was thinking like after, let's say if I take back with the pawn, let's say for example my opponent can take, and then they can maybe go back to d3 and sacrifice on c3. So my opponent was trying to get some sacrifices going, but I could even take the bishop on e2, but I saw a checkmate plan which came from the weakened king. So I played knight f5 check, king g4. I could have played bishop I played knight e3 check, so after the dark squared bishop sacrificed itself, the e3 square gets used, and then I can play knight g2 check, bishop e7, and it's checkmate after my opponent resigned here, but if they played a few more moves, then they're mated as these squares are occupied by my pieces. So that's like a sort of king safety sort of game. And I have one more game for you in this introduction video. This game I was actually playing as white, and this game is going to show several themes of this position. So I started with e4, e5, e5, and we kind of brought out our pawns, and this time the bishops were on g4 and b5 instead of the knights. And there's a lot of piece development. So here's some more like positional sort of lines. There's some more crazy lines in this opening, but we played a more positional line. We brought our knights to the center, and then here I played f5, which my idea was to like free up the f4 square for my second pawn so that I could maybe bring a rook to f3. But however, this is actually tactically losing. So after knight takes g5, if I take, let's say with my king, is actually bishop takes d3, which looks like a counterintuitive move because if you notice after f takes g6, my queen and my bishop are now free. So my opponent has freed my pieces for free. However, they have bishop takes e5 at the end of this because the knight is gone and no longer defends e5. My f6 square is going to fall and my king is probably going to get mated. It's going to be very hard to prevent it. So the computer is like, black is completely winning here. So this was actually a tactical mistake that my opponent did not see. So they took first, and they actually did see it because after that they played bishop takes d3. Only it's not as bad for me over here. So they did end up freeing my queen. But after I took, and then they took on e5, I played f4. So now they're taking, so they're able to take on f6 to free their pieces. Only over here, instead of playing knight takes f6 and letting their queen get into the game, I took advantage of the king safety. I played knight d6. Rook c7 was played to defend the b7 pawn. And here I took. So actually, this was a mistake. I had a draw with knight c4 check, king b5. Oh, I had a very simple draw over here, but I didn't take it. Maybe I thought that, I can't remember, I think I thought over here that I was winning with the sacrifice, but if b takes c3, then the king has this square, so I'm not actually winning anything, but maybe I thought I could like bring my bishop around. But in the game, my opponent took with the d pawn, and now I'm actually winning, so I played a couple of checks, brought my king in, and when I brought my queen in, and my queen is like pinning this knight to my opponent's queen, but also it's just threatening to go to c4 and mate on a4. My opponent couldn't do anything to stop that. After rook d8, queen c4 check, and after king a5, queen a4 is checkmate. So that's how this game went. And yeah, so this is the quick introduction to what's your decision custom position, and kind of some of the possibilities and tactical and thematic sort of very interesting gameplay that can happen with this position. So I hope you enjoyed looking at this. And in the future, because I'm going to make several more videos on this position, the next videos are going to be on all the theory that I've figured out in this position, and some of the lines are extremely fascinating. So I'm going to go from the more like intuitive lines to the more like crazy openings that they are with this position. So that's what I'm going to be showing, and maybe even eventually I'm going to be like streaming some live games that I play in this custom position. But yeah, this is just a quick introduction of all the themes that I have in this position that I've created, and hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully this is something that is very exciting for you, and see you in the next video.